Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going small, really, really small, to the nanoscale to explore the world of nanoplastics. You know, those tiny plastic particles that have some pretty big implications, and we've got a fascinating scientific review article to guide us through this.
Yeah, very interesting stuff.
This one focuses on the lesser-known nanoplastics, not those usual polystyrene suspects that seem to get all the attention.
Right.
So our mission today is to extract some key insights about the impact of these understudied nanoplastics on the environment, and human health too. And trust me, folks, there are some surprising things that even I didn't know, and I've been reading up on this stuff.
Yeah, there are some real surprises.
For example, did you know that most of the research that's out there really focuses on polystyrene nanoplastics?
Mm-hmm.
But polystyrene only makes up a small percentage of global plastic production. So what's with that?
Right. It's like we're looking under the lamppost because that's where the light is,
Yeah.
but the real action might be happening somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. So let's set the stage here. This review highlights that like a whopping 97% of research has focused on polystyrene nanoplastics, but they only make up about 6.2% of global plastic production. That's a huge gap.
A huge gap.
So what are we missing by focusing so heavily on polystyrene when there's all this other plastic out there?
Well, think about all the packaging you see every day.
Mm.
Stuff that wraps our food and our products.
Yeah.
A lot of that is polyethylene, or PE for short.
Okay.
Then there's polypropylene, or PP, which is in everything from bottle caps to carpets. And of course, we can't forget about PT, those ubiquitous water bottles. And these polymers, along with a few others, make up the vast majority of plastic waste out there.
Right, and that means they're breaking down into nanoplastics too, right?
Exactly. They're ending up in the environment, and we just don't know enough about what they're doing.
Okay, so we've got all these other types of nanoplastics out there, but we
Yeah.
don't know nearly as much about them. Why does that matter? I mean, is one nanoplastic really that different from another?
Well, that's the thing. You see, different polymers have different structures.
Okay.
They have what we call different backbone structures.
Backbones. Now you're making me think back to high school chemistry class.
Well, imagine a polymer chain, like a necklace.
Okay.
The backbone is like the string that holds it all together.
All right, I'm with you so far.
Now, some polymers, like PET and polyurethane, have what we call heteroatoms in their backbones, while others like PE, PP, and PVC don't.
Heteroatoms. Okay, you're losing me a little bit with the chemistry jargon.
Think of it like this. The heteroatoms are like special beads on that necklace string.
Okay, I like that analogy much better.
And just like different beads can change the look and feel of a necklace, these heteroatoms change how the plastic behaves.
Ah, so different beads, different behavior. Got it. But how does this actually affect the nanoplastics in the environment?
Well, these structural differences really determine how easily a plastic breaks down, how it interacts with other stuff in the environment, and ultimately how toxic it could be.
So it's not just about the plastic itself, it's about how it interacts with its surroundings.
Right, exactly. And for instance, those heteroatoms can act like little hooks grabbing onto other molecules.
Interesting.
Sometimes that makes those nanoplastics more likely to transport pollutants.
Yeah.
They can act like tiny little delivery vehicles for toxins.
That's not a good thought.
Yeah.
So we have this whole range of nanoplastics out there with different properties and potentially different levels of harm, and we're really just starting to scratch the surface of understanding them.
Yeah. We've got a lot of work to do.
This review also points out that there's a huge gap in research when it comes to these non-polystyrene nanoplastics, particularly on land. So what are the implications there, for soil, for plants?
It's a big concern.
Hmm.
We know nanoplastics can end up in the soil, but we're only just beginning to understand what happens to them there. Do they break down further? How do they impact plants, the microbes that live in the soil, and those really delicate ecosystems within the soil? There are so many unanswered questions.
That's a little scary, actually.
It is.
The review mentioned one study on PMMA nanoplastics in lettuce.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And apparently at high concentrations, those tiny particles actually stunted the lettuce's growth, messed with its water content, and even interfered with photosynthesis, which is like a plant's most important job.
It's essential for their survival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this study on lettuce really highlights how these under-the-radar nanoplastics can disrupt plant growth and even have implications for our food supply.
Yeah, that's pretty alarming.
Absolutely. And another study found that PMMA nanoplastics could accumulate in different parts of cucumber plants, especially in the roots and stems.
Really?
Yeah, and this raises some important questions about how nanoplastics might be moving through the food chain, from the soil to the plants and then potentially to us.
Okay, so we've seen how these less studied nanoplastics are causing trouble on land. Now,
Yeah.
let's dive into their impact on the aquatic world. There seems to be a bit more research in that area, right? You're right. There are more studies looking at the effects of these diverse nanoplastics on aquatic life, and the results are, well, they're concerning.
All right, give us the lowdown. What kind of impact are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, PET nanoplastics,
Mm.
the kind from water bottles,
Yeah.
they've been shown to damage zebrafish at a cellular level.
Wow.
We're talking mitochondrial damage in the liver, oxidative stress, and depletion of important antioxidants.
That's a lot of damage from something so small. It's incredible to think these tiny particles can have such a profound impact.
Yeah, it really is. And it's not just PE. Other studies have found that polyethylene, or PE, can reduce enzyme activity in the gills of zebrafish
Oh, wow.
and might even have neurotoxic effects.
Neurotoxic effects, so they're messing with their brains.
Potentially, yeah. And get this, polypropylene nanoplastics that got often found in bottle caps have been shown to activate immune responses in leeches, and in some cases even trigger programmed cell death.
Wow, so it's like a mixed bag of effects depending on the nanoplastic and the organism.
Exactly, and it really highlights the complexity of this issue.
And remember those heteroatoms we talked about earlier?
Right, those special beads?
The review also highlights that weathered nanoplastics, the ones that have been floating around in the ocean for a while, tend to have a greater negative impact on microalgae growth than pristine nanoplastics.
It's like they become even more potent over time.
So older nanoplastics are even worse. Why is that?
Well, it seems those structural differences, including those heteroatoms, might affect their ability to bind to other pollutants in the environment.
Ah, so they become little sponges for toxins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as they weather and break down, they can become tiny little carriers of other harmful substances.
That is a worrisome thought. It seems like the longer these nanoplastics persist, the more potential they have to cause harm. But what about us? How do nanoplastics affect human health?
Well, that's a question scientists are actively investigating, and while the research is still in its early stages, there are some concerning findings. For one thing we know, nanoplastics can end up in wastewater treatment plants.
That makes sense. That's where a lot of our plastic waste ends up. But they're so tiny, I'd imagine they just slip right through the filters.
Well, that's not always the case, and it turns out their presence can affect the microbial communities that do the important work of breaking down other contaminants in the water.
Yeah.
Those helpful microorganisms.
Ah, so they're messing with the natural cleaning systems too.
Yeah, for example, PTFE, or Teflon nanoplastics, have been shown to enhance the toxicity of other pollutants, reducing the ability of those microorganisms to do their job.
Wow, so they're not just polluting the water, they're making it harder to clean up other pollution.
Right. It's a double whammy.
That finding about weathered nanoplastics being more harmful really struck me. It makes you wonder if we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the long-term consequences of all this plastic pollution.
Exactly, and there's more.
Oh.
Studies are showing that nanoplastics can have a range of effects on clinically important microbes,
Mm-hmm.
the bacteria that can cause infections.
Mm.
For some, like B. subtilis and S. aureus HDPE and PP nanoplastics, actually increase their viability.
Wait, so they're making those bacteria stronger.
That's what the research suggests.
That's definitely not what we want.
No, it's not good.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, those same nanoplastics inhibited the growth of P. aeruginosa and E. coli.
So it's like a mixed bag again?
Yeah, it's a complex interplay, and we're only beginning to understand the implications.
Okay, so nanoplastics are affecting the microorganisms all around us sometimes in ways we don't expect. But what about direct effects on human cells? What's the science showing there?
Well, there are a lot of in vitro studies, the ones they do in lab dishes with human cell lines, and the results are, well, kind of a mixed bag.
Mixed bag? How so?
Some studies show that nanoplastics can reduce the metabolic activity in cells, while others are finding evidence of DNA damage, oxidative stress, even changes in mitochondrial function, the powerhouses of our cells.
Right, the energy factories.
Yeah.
So they're definitely having an effect, but it seems like the type of damage might depend on the type of nanoplastic we're talking about.
That seems to be the case. Yeah, for example, one study found that black-colored peat particles caused DNA strand breaks,
Interesting.
while transparent ones had different effects. So this suggests that the characteristics of the particles, things like their color, their size, their shape, could all play a role in their toxicity.
It's like saying not all dust is created equal,
Right.
Some might just be annoying while others could be downright harmful.
Exactly. We really need to understand those nuances.
We do, but in vitro studies, Those lab dish studies can only tell us so much. What about in vivo studies, the ones done in living organisms?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Have they done any studies with nanoplastics in animals?
There are a few, but not as many as we'd like to see.
Okay.
However, the findings from these studies are concerning.
Oh.
In mice, for example, PP nanoplastics cause lung inflammation and tissue damage.
Lung inflammation, that's not good.
No, it's not. And another study found that PE nanoplastics led to brain inflammation and cognitive impairment in mice.
Wait, brain inflammation, so they're messing with their brains.
Seems so, yeah.
That study about brain inflammation in mice is definitely concerning. It makes you think about the potential long-term effects of these nanoplastics, on human health.
Huh.
Are they seeing effects in other organs too?
Well, it seems that way, yeah. And because it's difficult and ethically challenging to do these kinds of studies in humans, researchers are turning to modeling to try and predict the potential impact of nanoplastics on our health.
Modeling like computer simulation.
Precisely.
Okay.
There's a fascinating study that used modeling to look at the toxicity of different nanoplastics in the human placenta.
The placenta.
Yeah, and they found that polycarbonate PET and PS had the highest toxicity to placental enzymes,
Wow.
suggesting that these nanoplastics could potentially interfere with placental function.
That's a big deal. The placenta is so crucial for a healthy pregnancy. Are there other areas where they're using modeling to assess nanoplastic risk?
Yes, another study used modeling to look at how nanoplastics might bind to secretory immunoglobulin A, or SIGA,
SIGA.
which is an antibody found in breast milk, and they discovered that polycarbonate had the highest binding affinity, suggesting that nanoplastics could potentially interfere with this important immune factor.
Okay, so we're seeing evidence that nanoplastics can affect human cells in the lab, cause problems in animal studies, and modeling suggests they could interfere with crucial processes like placental function and immune factors in breast milk. This is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
What does it all mean? Where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the most important takeaway from this deep dive is that we need to expand our research focus beyond polystyrene nanoplastics. We need to look at the whole spectrum of these tiny particles, especially their effects on terrestrial environments and human health.
Absolutely. We can't ignore the vast majority of nanoplastics just because they're harder to study. We need to understand the full scope of this problem. And it's not just about figuring out, what harm they might cause. We also need to understand how these nanoplastics are transported through the environment, how they break down or don't break down, and how all of that might be changing as our planet warms and weather patterns shift.
You've hit on some very crucial points. This review really emphasizes the need for a systems perspective.
Systems perspective.
We can't just look at nanoplastics in isolation. We need to understand how they interact with the whole ecosystem, from the tiniest microbes in the soil to the largest creatures in the ocean and everything in between.
So a more holistic approach, looking at the big picture and all the connections.
Precisely, and that includes us.
Right.
We are part of this system too, and we need to understand how these nanoplastics might be entering our bodies, accumulating over time, and potentially impacting our health.
It's a daunting task,
It is.
but one that we can't afford to ignore. It really is. It all feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest, but I guess knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. The more we understand about these nanoplastics, the better equipped we'll be to address the problem.
I hope so.
And there's one more thought I'd like to leave you with. We talked earlier about how weathered nanoplastics, the ones that have been exposed to the elements for a while, seem to be more harmful because they can pick up other toxins along the way. So here's the provocative question. If weathered nanoplastics are more harmful, what does that mean for the future as plastic pollution continues to break down in the environment?
That's a really good question. It's like a ticking time bomb,
Yeah.
The longer these plastics persist, the more potential they have to become these tiny toxic time capsules.
Precisely. And that's why this research is so important. We need to understand the long-term consequences of plastic pollution, not just for the environment, but for human health as well.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. I think it's safe to say we've learned that there's a whole world of nanoplastics beyond polystyrene, and they're impacting the environment and potentially our health in ways we're only beginning to understand.
I agree, there's a lot we still don't know. But by shining a light on these issues and supporting further research, we can start to develop strategies to mitigate the risks and protect ourselves and our planet.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who want to dive deeper into this topic, we'll be sure to include links to all the references mentioned in today's show notes. So until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, even the smallest things can have a big impact.